They handed her the microphone before they even looked at me. If you've ever been dismissed, humiliated, or pushed aside by someone you trusted, stay with this story. What happens next proves that silence is sometimes the most dangerous response of all. I stood there, hands folded, while my daughter smiled like this moment had always belonged to her. The words came out of her mouth easily, too easily, as if she had practiced them somewhere I wasn't invited. I didn't interrupt. I didn't clear my throat. I felt something settle inside my chest instead, quiet and cold, the way snow does before it hardens to ice. It was 11:40 p.m. and the dock lights flickered the way they always did when the wind picked up from the water. I noticed that detail because I notice details when something is wrong. The air smelled like fuel and cold metal. Somewhere behind me, someone laughed a little too loudly. I remember thinking that laughter didn't belong to joy. It belonged to relief. "She's stepping aside," my daughter said into the mic, her voice bright. "This is mine now." I nodded once, slowly, like I agreed with her. That nod wasn't surrender. It was timing. A man in a navy jacket touched my elbow. Not roughly, carefully, as if he'd been instructed to treat me like fragile glass. I looked down at his hand, then back at my daughter. She didn't look back. Her eyes stayed forward, fixed on faces that mattered more than mine. I picked up my purse. The small one. The one I always carry when I don't expect to need anything. My keys were inside. My phone. A folded receipt from earlier that day. Enough. As they guided me toward the end of the dock, my heel caught on a loose plank. I didn't fall, but I felt it. That small stumble felt louder than the microphone. No one helped. Someone cleared their throat. Someone else turned away. I told myself to breathe. In through the nose. Out through the mouth. The way my doctor taught me after 60, when my heart started reminding me it was still working. The water slapped softly against the posts, rhythmic, patient. I'd learned long ago that water doesn't rush. It waits. Behind me, my daughter continued speaking. I couldn't hear the words anymore, but I recognized the tone. Confident. Certain. Borrowed certainty, but convincing enough if you didn't know the cost. I knew the cost. We stopped near the edge where the lights didn't reach as well. The shadows were thicker there. I realized then that everything had been arranged to look clean. No shouting. No scene. Just removal. "I can walk," I said quietly. The man released my arm immediately. He looked relieved, like he'd been hoping I'd say that. I took 3 steps on my own and stopped. Turned. The microphone squealed briefly as my daughter laughed at something someone said near her. That sound traveled straight through me. I felt anger, yes, but underneath it was something steadier. Recognition. This hadn't started tonight. I remembered small things. A document I hadn't been asked to review. A meeting time changed without notice. A look exchanged between her and her husband that stopped when I entered the room. None of it dramatic enough to confront. All of it clear now. A woman near the railing avoided my eyes. She used to ask me questions. Advice. She held her drink with both hands like it was suddenly heavy. I checked my phone without unlocking it. Just the time glowing faintly. Still 11:40. Still early enough. Somewhere, something I set in motion earlier was waiting. Not reacting. Waiting. As I stood there, I felt the familiar ache in my knees, the one that comes when I've been still too long. Age announces itself in moments like this, not with weakness but with reminders. I adjusted my stance and thought about how many times I'd stood in uncomfortable places for her sake. School offices. Hospital hallways. Courtrooms when her friend needed support. I had always shown up. Tonight she had arranged it so I would quietly disappear. A couple passed behind me whispering. I caught fragments. Awkward. Did you see her face? Not cruel words. Worse. Casual ones. That casualness told me how confident everyone was that this was finished. Final. My phone vibrated once inside my purse. Just once. I didn't reach for it. I didn't need to. The weight of it against my hip was enough. I'd checked it earlier that evening when the sun was still up and the sky looked harmless. I'd made a note then, the kind you make when you've learned not to trust verbal promises. I remembered closing the app and thinking this should be enough. The wind shifted, bringing the smell of water stronger now, mixed with something sweet from the catering table. Someone clinked a glass. Someone said my daughter's name with admiration. I wondered who they thought she was thanking. I pressed my lips together and swallowed. My throat felt tight, but not from tears. From restraint. Crying would have been easier. Crying would have given them a story they understood. I wasn't going to give them that. Another man approached the edge of the dock and stopped short when he saw me there, lingering. He gave a small nod, unsure. I returned it. Politeness is a habit that doesn't break easily, even when you're being pushed aside. I thought about leaving without looking back. About walking to the car and driving home, locking the door, making tea. The normal ending. But something in me refused to let this moment blur. I needed to see it clearly. To witness the exact second things changed. So I stayed. I listened to the water. I watched reflections tremble and reform. I counted my breaths. 4 in. 4 out. Then the applause started. It wasn't thunderous. Didn't need to be. It was steady. Confident. The kind that assumes agreement. My hands curled slightly at my sides, then relaxed again. I reminded myself that applause fades. Records remain. That was when I felt it, the shift. The sense of being noticed again. Of becoming inconvenient. My daughter finally looked at me then. Just once. Her smile tightened when our eyes met, and in that moment I saw it. Not guilt. Not fear. Calculation. She stepped down from the small platform and walked toward me, heels clicking sharply against the wood. Each step sounded deliberate, like punctuation. "Mom," she said, lowering her voice. "Let's not do this here." I studied her face. The familiar parts. The stranger underneath. I wanted to ask when she decided I was in the way. I wanted to ask who taught her to erase someone so neatly. I said nothing. Silence has weight when you know how to carry it. She leaned closer. "You'll understand later," she added, as if time could smooth this over, as if later would belong to her too. I felt my pulse in my throat. Slow. Steady. Alive. The man in the navy jacket cleared his throat behind me. A signal. A reminder. I shifted my purse on my shoulder and stepped closer to my daughter, just enough that only she could hear me breathe. I smiled. Not the kind of smile she knew. Not the one that forgave. The one that measured. "Be careful," I said softly. Her eyes flickered. Just for a second. Then she straightened, lifted her chin, and gestured toward the parking lot as if she were granting permission. I turned away before she could say anything else. The dock felt longer on the way back. Every step echoed. Every sound seemed sharper. I heard my own shoes. The water. My breath. Behind me, the microphone crackled again. At the gate, I stopped and placed my hand on the cold metal. I didn't open it yet. I looked back one last time. My daughter stood under the lights now, surrounded, confident, already celebrating something she believed was settled. I memorized that image. My hand lingered on the gate longer than necessary. I felt the cold seep into my palms, steadying me. Somewhere behind me, my daughter laughed again, sharp and sure. I closed my fingers around the metal, grounding myself, reminding myself that moments like this don't vanish. They transform. Then I opened the gate and stepped through, knowing the next move wouldn't be loud, but it would be impossible to ignore for everyone involved here. And the quiet followed me like a shadow I chose not to shake. The car door closed with a hollow sound that felt final in a way words never could. I sat there longer than necessary, hands resting on the steering wheel, letting my breathing slow before turning the key. The dashboard clock glowed softly. Still the same night. Still the same hour. Nothing had shifted on the surface, and that was exactly how I needed it. Driving home, I kept the radio off. Silence helps me think, and tonight I needed my thoughts clear, not softened by music or distracted by voices pretending everything makes sense. Streetlights passed in steady intervals, lighting up familiar roads that suddenly felt unfamiliar, as if I were seeing them from the outside for the first time. At home, the porch light clicked on automatically like it always does. That small predictability steadied me. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and set my purse down carefully as if order still mattered. The house smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old wood. Safe smells. Honest ones. I didn't cry. That surprised me more than anything else. Instead, I took off my shoes, lined them up neatly, and poured myself a glass of water. My hands shook just enough for me to notice, so I wrapped them around the glass until the trembling passed. 65 years teaches you when to wait for your body to catch up with your mind. The phone stayed in my purse. I didn't check it yet. Something had changed, I would feel it before I saw it. I sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I'd helped my daughter with homework decades ago, and thought about how easily people mistake quiet for surrender. Silence makes them comfortable. It tells them they've won. I let them have that comfort. The first call came just after midnight. I watched the phone vibrate across the table, the name lighting up the screen. A relative. Close enough to know better. I didn't answer. The second call followed 5 minutes later. Then a text. Everything okay? Let's talk tomorrow. Tomorrow was a word people used when they wanted time to shape the story. I wiped the table down slowly, deliberately, even though it was already clean. Movement helped. Purpose helped more. When you're my age, you learn that pacing yourself isn't weakness. It's strategy. I opened a drawer and pulled out a folder I hadn't touched in months. Not hidden. Not secret. Just overlooked, the way things are when people assume you've stepped aside. I flipped through it without reading, just confirming it was still where I left it. It was. The clock ticked louder than usual, or maybe I was listening harder. Each sound felt amplified, as if the house itself knew something had shifted and was waiting for instructions. Another text came through, this time from my daughter. Let's not make this harder than it needs to be. I smiled at that. Not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. She believed difficulty came from resistance. She didn't understand patience. I typed nothing back. Upstairs, I changed into comfortable clothes and washed my face, studying the woman in the mirror. Her eyes were tired, yes, but clear. Focused. This wasn't a breaking point. It was a narrowing. Lying in bed, I replayed moments from the past year, not emotionally but analytically. When had decisions started happening without me? When had conversations ended just a little too quickly? The answers didn't hurt the way they might have earlier. They felt useful now. Sleep came in short stretches. Each time I woke, I resisted the urge to check my phone. Letting others wait was part of the recalibration. By morning, the silence I'd created felt intentional instead of imposed. Sunlight filled the kitchen when I made coffee, steady and ordinary. I took my time with breakfast, chewing slowly, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. Normalcy can be armor if you wear it properly. The phone buzzed again. A voicemail this time. I didn't play it. I didn't need their explanations yet. Explanations come when people are nervous. Mid-morning, I drove to the grocery store, moving through the aisles like nothing had changed. An older woman smiled at me near the produce section, and I smiled back. The world doesn't stop for betrayal. Keeps going, and sometimes that's comforting. In the parking lot, I checked my phone for the first time. Messages stacked neatly like items waiting to be processed. I read none of them. Instead, I opened a note I'd written earlier that week, adding a single line beneath it. Then I closed it. Back home, I sorted mail, discarding ads, keeping envelopes that mattered. One in particular felt heavier than the rest, though it weighed no more than paper ever does. I set it aside and made another cup of coffee, this time letting it go cold while I stood by the window. Across the street, a neighbor watered her lawn, waving as she noticed me. I waved back. Appearances matter. Especially when people assume they don't. The afternoon passed quietly. Too quietly for anyone paying attention. That quiet was doing work I didn't need to rush. Late in the day, my phone rang again. A different name. Someone who usually didn't call unless there was a reason. I let it ring once more than necessary before answering. Just checking in, he said, casual but careful. I figured, I replied. Pause. Then, everything all right? For now, I said, and meant it. After we hung up, I stood still for a long moment, letting the weight of that conversation settle. One small confirmation. Nothing more. Nothing less. Evening came softly. I cooked something simple, ate alone, and cleaned up immediately after. Order creates clarity. Clarity creates momentum. Another message arrived from my daughter, longer this time. Defensive. Polite. Framed as concern. I read it once, then deleted it without responding. Letting go can be as powerful as holding on. As night settled in, I returned to the folder, this time reading carefully. My eyes moved slower than they used to, but they missed nothing. I made notes in the margins, small marks only I would understand. Silence, I realized, was making them restless. They were waiting for emotion. For outrage. For noise. I gave them none. Before bed, I placed my phone face down on the nightstand and turned off the lamp. In the dark, I felt something unfamiliar but welcome. Control. They thought my quiet meant I was retreating. They mistook restraint for resignation. That misunderstanding would cost them more than they knew, but for now I let them sleep comfortably in it. Tomorrow would bring questions. I was ready to let them ask. I was ready to let them ask, and the first question arrived before I finished my morning coffee. The phone rang with a cautious tone, the kind people use when they want information without revealing their own position. I answered without greeting, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make the other person speak first. He asked how I was holding up, using words that sounded sympathetic but carried a careful distance. I replied honestly, which is to say selectively. After the call ended, I didn't feel relief. I felt focus. Something small had shifted overnight, subtle but undeniable, like a floorboard loosening under steady weight. I carried my mug to the desk by the window and opened my laptop, the screen lighting my face in a way that felt almost clinical. This wasn't curiosity anymore. It was confirmation. I logged into an old account I still kept active, one most people assumed I'd abandoned. The password came back to me easily, muscle memory from years of repetition. Inside were records, dates, notes written in my own careful shorthand. I hadn't opened them in a long time, but they were intact, untouched, waiting. Scrolling through, I noticed something out of place. A timestamp that didn't align. A revision logged under a name I didn't recognize. My chest tightened, not with panic but with the sharp clarity of realization. This wasn't sloppy. It was quiet. Intentional. I leaned back in my chair and listened to the house settle around me. Pipes clicked. A car passed outside. Ordinary sounds, grounding me while something extraordinary unfolded line by line on my screen. I copied a few details into a notebook, writing slower than I used to but more deliberately. By mid-morning I had 3 separate inconsistencies, none dramatic on their own, but together forming a shape I couldn't ignore. I resisted the urge to jump ahead. Patterns reveal themselves only when you let them. The doorbell rang unexpectedly, breaking my concentration. A delivery I hadn't ordered. I signed for it and set the box aside without opening it, noting the sender's name. Familiar. That was interesting. Back at the desk, I made a call to someone I trusted, not because they were loyal but because they were precise. We spoke briefly, exchanging pleasantries before getting to the point. I asked a question framed as curiosity. The pause on the other end told me more than the answer did. "I'll look into it," she said carefully. "That's all I need," I replied. After hanging up, I opened the package. Inside were copies of documents I hadn't requested but had once mentioned in passing months ago. Someone was paying attention. Or someone was nervous. Either way, the timing mattered. I spread the papers out across the table, smoothing each one with my palm. The texture of paper still comforts me. Thought. Honest. These weren't accusations. They were evidence of movement, of decisions made just beyond my line of sight. One document referenced a meeting I hadn't attended. Another listed approvals dated after I was supposedly stepping back. That phrase echoed in my mind, stripped now of its politeness. Stepping back hadn't meant resting. It had meant removing. I stood to stretch, feeling the pull in my lower back, the reminder that my body didn't move as quickly as my thoughts. I paced the room, letting ideas settle, then returned to the table with fresh eyes. Around noon, my daughter's name appeared on my phone again. I didn't answer. Instead, I watched it ring out, imagining the expression on her face. Was it irritation yet? Or still confidence? I returned to the laptop and opened another folder, this one containing correspondence I'd archived years ago. Messages. Attachments. Small decisions that had seemed insignificant at the time. I skimmed until one line stopped me cold. It wasn't a confession. It was a reference. Casual. Assumptive. Written as if my absence was already understood. My throat tightened, and for the first time since the doc, emotion rose fast and sharp. Not grief. Betrayal had passed that stage. This was something closer to offense. The kind that stiffens your spine. I closed the laptop and sat still, hands folded, breathing until the surge passed. Reacting too soon would cloud my judgment. I needed clarity, not catharsis. The afternoon brought another call, this time from someone I hadn't spoken to in over a year. We exchanged updates, then he mentioned a delay he hadn't expected. He laughed it off, but his voice lacked ease. "Probably nothing," he said. "Probably," I agreed. After we hung up, I returned to my notes and added a question mark beside one name. It felt like placing a chess piece rather than circling a suspect. Games require patience. By early evening, the house felt charged, not tense but alert. Even the air seemed sharper. I made a simple dinner and ate standing up, my mind too active to settle. As I washed the plate, I noticed my hands were steady again. Later, I reviewed the documents one final time, this time photographing key pages and storing them somewhere secure. Redundancy matters. I'd learned that lesson the hard way long before my daughter learned hers. A message came in from a mutual acquaintance, phrased casually but asking pointed questions. I replied with warmth and vagueness, the combination people trust most. When the sun dipped low, I stepped outside onto the porch, letting the cool air clear my head. The sky darkened slowly, deliberately, as if matching my pace. Across the street, lights flicked on one by one. Life continued unaware. Inside, my phone buzzed again. This time I answered. "We need to talk," my daughter said, skipping pleasantries. "Yes," I replied evenly. "We will." "When?" she pressed. "Soon," I said, and ended the call before she could respond. I sat back down at the desk, the papers now neatly stacked, the questions sharper than they'd been that morning. The trail wasn't shouting yet, but it was whispering, and I was listening closely. They thought paperwork was invisible, that it faded with time. They forgot that paper remembers. I turned off the lamp and let the room fall into shadow, already aware that something had begun to speak back, and it wasn't finished. Because by morning the silence I'd created had started making other people uncomfortable. The first sign wasn't dramatic. It rarely is. It was a small disruption, the kind that feels easy to dismiss if you don't know what to look for. My phone buzzed just after sunrise with a message that wasn't meant for reassurance, even though it pretended to be. Someone wanted to clarify a few things. Clarify is what people say when certainty has slipped. I sat at the edge of my bed longer than usual, feet flat on the floor, letting my joints wake up properly. At my age, rushing only creates pain later. I stretched slowly, feeling the familiar stiffness ease, and reminded myself that patience had carried me this far. It would carry me further. In the kitchen, the coffee maker sputtered louder than normal. Or maybe I was noticing everything more closely now. I poured the coffee, didn't add sugar, and drank it standing by the window. Across the street, a delivery truck idled longer than necessary. The driver checked his phone twice. Waiting. Everyone was waiting for something. The message was followed by another. Then a voicemail. Different voices. Similar tone. Polite. Curious. Uneasy. I returned none of them. Instead, I opened my calendar and reviewed the week ahead. I hadn't planned much on purpose. Space is useful when events start rearranging themselves. I circled one afternoon in pen, not because I knew what would happen then, but because I sensed it would matter. Mid-morning, I drove into town, not to confront anyone but to observe. I parked where I always did, walked the same route, nodded to the same faces. Familiarity disarms suspicion. People speak more freely when they think nothing has changed. At the bank, the line moved slowly. I waited without irritation, watching reflections in the glass, listening to fragments of conversation. A man ahead of me complained about a hold on his account. The teller's voice stayed calm, practiced. "It's temporary," she said. Temporary is another word people use when they don't feel in control. When it was my turn, the teller greeted me by name. I smiled back and handled my business efficiently. Nothing unusual. Nothing alarming. The absence of alarm was itself telling. Outside, my phone rang again. I answered this time. "We're hearing some things," the voice said, skipping greetings. "I'm sure you are," I replied. Pause. "Then, is there something we should know?" I considered that. "If there were," I said, "you'd already know." The call ended quickly after that. Driving home, I noticed a tension in my shoulders I hadn't felt the day before. Not fear. Anticipation. The feeling you get when you sense a structure shifting, wood creaking before a crack appears. At home, I found an email waiting for me. Carefully worded. Professional. Asking for confirmation on a detail I'd already clarified months ago. Asking again meant the first answer no longer felt solid. I replied with a single sentence and an attachment I knew they would recognize. The response came faster than expected. Too fast. "Thank you. We're reviewing." Reviewing meant stopping. Pausing. Looking more closely. Confidence doesn't need review. Doubt does. I spent the afternoon organizing my notes, not adding anything new, just aligning what I already had. Sometimes clarity comes from arrangement, not discovery. I stacked papers by date, then by name, noticing how patterns emerged when chaos was removed. My daughter didn't call that day. That absence spoke louder than her messages ever had. When people stop pressing, it's because they're recalculating. Late afternoon, the doorbell rang. A neighbor this time holding a misdelivered package. We exchanged small talk on the porch. She mentioned hearing something through her nephew, something about changes happening. She laughed it off. Gossip. But gossip doesn't surface without a current beneath it. After she left, I stood in the doorway longer than necessary, feeling the air cool against my arms. The house felt steady behind me. Thought. I stepped back inside and closed the door gently. Another email arrived just before dinner. This one apologetic in tone. Apologies appear when confidence fractures. I read it twice, then archived it without response. I cooked slowly that night, chopping vegetables with care, letting the rhythm settle my thoughts. My hands knew this work. Familiar tasks ground me when everything else feels uncertain. As I ate, my phone buzzed again. A message from my daughter, shorter than usual. Can we talk tomorrow? Tomorrow again. The word had changed tone. Less control. More request. I didn't answer. Later, I sat in my living room with only a small lamp on, listening to the clock tick. Each second felt distinct, measurable. I thought about how certainty is often loud. How it announces itself. Doubt creeps instead. My phone rang once more, this time from someone I hadn't expected to hear from directly. We spoke carefully, circling the issue without naming it. He asked if I was aware of the situation. I told him I was aware of several situations. When we hung up, I felt something close to satisfaction, though I kept it contained. Satisfaction can lead to mistakes if indulged too soon. That night, sleep came slowly. My mind stayed active, connecting dots, testing assumptions. I resisted the urge to act further. Pressure works best when allowed to build. In the morning, the change was unmistakable. Messages arrived early. Meetings were rescheduled. Language softened. People who had once spoken in absolutes now used conditionals. I dressed carefully, choosing comfort over impression. Confidence doesn't need decoration. Around midday, I received confirmation of something small but significant. A delay. A reconsideration. Nothing final. Nothing public. But enough to tell me the foundation had shifted. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes briefly. I felt my heartbeat steady and strong. I felt present. Grounded. My daughter finally called that afternoon. Her voice sounded different. Less polished. More urgent. I didn't expect this, she said. Expectations can be dangerous, I replied. She hesitated. People are asking questions. They always do, I said. There was a long silence on the line. When she spoke again, her voice dropped. What do you want? I thought about that question carefully. About how often women my age are expected to want less. To shrink. To settle. I want accuracy, I said. And time. She exhaled sharply. This didn't have to get complicated. It didn't, I agreed. But it did. After the call, I sat quietly, absorbing the shift. This wasn't victory. Not yet. But the balance had changed. The certainty she'd worn so easily had cracked, and through that crack, doubt was spreading. As evening fell, I returned to my notes one more time, not to add but to confirm. Everything was aligned. Everything was moving. I turned off the lamp again, not because I was done, but because I didn't need the light to see it anymore. Their confidence was no longer intact, and once confidence fractures, it never fits back together the same way. And in that quiet darkness, I finally understood that nothing I wanted required taking anything back. The next morning came without urgency. That was the first sign I'd crossed into different ground. I woke before my alarm rested clear. No tightness in my chest. No rehearsed speeches in my head. I dressed slowly, choosing clothes that felt like myself, not armor, and made breakfast without checking my phone. Whatever waited there could wait a little longer. When I did look, the messages were different now. Not demanding. Not casual. Careful. Each one asked a version of the same thing without saying it directly. Where do you stand? What do you want? How do we fix this? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I opened the folder one last time. Not to review, not to double-check, but to acknowledge it. Every document, every note, every quiet record had done its work. They had shifted conversations. They had slowed decisions. They had revealed who benefited from my absence and who feared my return. That was the twist no one expected. I wasn't trying to reclaim a position. I was revealing a dependency. Late morning I agreed to meet. Neutral place. Public enough to keep voices calm. Ordinary enough to keep egos in check. I arrived early and chose a table where I could see the door. Habit. Wisdom. The kind that comes with age and a few hard-earned lessons. My daughter arrived 10 minutes late. She looked tired. Not dramatic tired. The kind that comes from nights spent explaining things you thought were settled. She slid into the chair across from me and placed her phone face down, a gesture meant to signal presence. It didn't go unnoticed. I didn't know it would turn into this, she said. I stirred my coffee watching the cream dissolve. That's true, I replied. You didn't know. She flinched slightly. Not at the words but at the calm. Calm makes people nervous when they're expecting anger. They're asking me to make statements, she continued. To reassure people. And can you? I asked. She hesitated. That hesitation was the answer. I reached into my bag and placed a single document on the table. Just one. Not the most damaging. Not the most revealing. The most clarifying. Her eyes moved across it and I watched understanding settle in, followed by something close to fear. You didn't file anything, she said slowly. No, I agreed. I didn't have to. The silence stretched. Outside a car passed. A door closed. Life continued. They assumed I was gone, I said gently. That I'd stepped aside completely. They didn't check what I still held because they didn't think I mattered anymore. Her shoulders dropped. What do you want? There it was again. The question everyone asked when power shifted. I want separation, I said. Clean. Final. Her eyes widened. You mean? I mean I don't want it back, I said. Not the role. Not the credit. Not the control. She looked confused now. Then why do this? I met her gaze fully. Because you mistook my presence for convenience. And my silence for permission. The truth landed between us, heavy but undeniable. She looked away first. By the end of the meeting, nothing dramatic had been decided aloud. No signatures. No apologies. Just an understanding that the ground beneath her had changed and it wasn't changing back. When I left I felt lighter. Not victorious. Free. The calls slowed after that. Some stopped entirely. Others changed tone. Offers appeared where demands once stood. I declined most of them politely. I accepted one on my terms with conditions that ensured distance instead of involvement. People adjusted quickly. They always do when survival is involved. Weeks passed and the situation resolved itself without spectacle. A quiet restructuring. A shift in leadership. Public explanations that never mention me. That was intentional. My absence had become part of the solution. One afternoon I received a message confirming what I already knew. The final piece had settled. The dependency exposed earlier had been corrected, and with it the assumption that I could be erased without consequence. I walked through my house that evening touching familiar surfaces. Fable. The doorframe. The window where I'd stood watching neighbors live their lives unaware of mine. Everything felt earned again. My daughter came by once more, this time without an agenda. She looked older somehow. More cautious. We talked about neutral things. The weather. A recipe. A shared memory she almost avoided mentioning. Before she left, she paused at the door. I didn't understand, she said quietly. I know, I replied. Understanding may come later. Or not at all. Either way, I didn't need it anymore. After she left, I sat alone in the living room as dusk settled in. The light softened the edges of everything. I thought about how often women my age are told to fight louder, demand more, prove relevance. I had done the opposite. I had stepped back not into weakness but into leverage. I had let go not out of loss but out of choice. And in doing so, I had won something far more permanent than a title or a seat at a table. I won peace. That night I turned off the lamp one final time and smiled into the dark, knowing that the greatest revenge wasn't taking anything back. It was never needing it again. If this story moved you, reminded you of your own strength, or made you feel seen, subscribe for more powerful, emotional stories where quiet women reclaim their power without apology.